Hello, my friend. I'm genuinely grateful you've chosen to spend your time watching this video, and if you decide to subscribe to my channel, it would mean even more to me. Your support truly makes a difference. Let's jump straight into the story. My name is Philip, and more than 20 years ago, I was living a life that looked nothing like the one I have now. A man convinced his marriage was secure and his future neatly mapped out. At that time, I worked as a construction foreman, logging exhausting shifts that often stretched from 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. The pay was steady, and I justified every extra hour as a step toward ensuring my family's future. My wife, Patricia, and I were raising 2 children then, Emma, our 12-year-old daughter, and Gerald, our 8-year-old son. The construction business demands everything you've got to give. Most days I was gone before the sun rose and didn't return until well past dinner time. Weekends weren't for rest. They were spent catching up on paperwork, inspecting job sites, or taking side gigs for extra income. Each missed school play, each canceled family outing, every night I collapsed into bed too tired to talk. I convinced myself they were all necessary sacrifices. Patricia never voiced complaints about how little I was home. If she resented it, she kept it hidden. Looking back, I realize I was busy building houses for other people while failing to strengthen the foundation of my own family. Hindsight has a cruel way of pointing out the warning signs you ignored. The truth finally caught up to me on what began as a completely ordinary Tuesday evening. That day I had just finished a demanding shift supervising the concrete pour for a new subdivision's foundation. On my way inside, I stopped at the mailbox. My neighbor, Tony, stood outside watering his lawn and called me over with the careful tone of someone about to deliver bad news. Tony had been my neighbor for 8 years. A retired postal worker, he spent his days tending his immaculate garden or restoring a vintage Mustang in his garage. He knew the neighborhood inside and out, who came and went, which homes had visitors, and whose lawns needed attention. Though he was observant, he wasn't the type to interfere, at least not until that night. Turning off his hose, he stepped to the fence that separated our yards. I could see his unease in the way he shifted from foot to foot. Then he told me that over the past few months, he'd noticed something unusual. A man driving a blue Chevrolet Silverado had been stopping by my house during the day, always when my truck was gone. The visits, Tony explained, lasted for hours, usually from late morning until mid-afternoon. My first reaction was to brush it off, suggesting maybe it was a repairman or contractor Patricia had hired. But Tony shook his head, offering a detailed description of the man. No work uniform, no signs of doing any actual repairs. The same man, on multiple occasions, always when I was at work. I didn't want to believe him. Patricia and I had been together for 15 years, had faced our share of challenges, raised 2 great kids, and built what I thought was a life based on trust. The idea that she could betray me seemed impossible. But once suspicion plants itself, it grows quickly in the dark. In the next 3 days, I began noticing small changes I'd overlooked before. Patricia seemed distracted when I spoke about my day. She was doing laundry more often, and new clothes appeared in her closet. Items she said were for school functions or neighborhood gatherings I rarely attended. Friday was the day everything shifted. I left for work as usual, but Tony was determined to show me proof. That morning, he sent me a photo, complete with a timestamp, of the blue Silverado parked in my driveway. Staring at the image, I felt a wave of anger mixed with disbelief. Part of me wanted to leave immediately and confront the situation. Another part clung to the hope there was a reasonable explanation. But I had responsibilities on site and couldn't abandon them. I thanked Tony and forced myself to keep working. When I arrived home that evening, the scene inside could have been lifted from a family commercial. Patricia was in the kitchen cooking dinner, Emma sat at the dining table working on homework, and Gerald played in the living room. Everything appeared perfectly normal. I waited until the kids were upstairs before saying anything. While she was stacking dishes into the dishwasher, I asked calmly about the blue truck. At first, she looked genuinely confused, insisting she didn't know what I was talking about and hadn't noticed any unusual vehicles. When I brought up Tony's repeated sightings and the photo from that morning, her tone shifted. For about 10 minutes, she denied it all, dismissing Tony as a bored, meddling neighbor who had nothing better to do than watch other people's lives. But when I pressed, her defensiveness solidified into anger. She turned the blame toward me, accusing me of neglecting her, of putting my work before our family, and claiming I had no right to question her when I barely knew what went on in our home during the day. Eventually, she admitted the man, Sam, was someone she'd met through Gerald's school. He was recently divorced and, according to her, understood the kind of loneliness she felt at home. She insisted their relationship was nothing more than emotional support. I knew she wasn't telling me the whole truth, but at that point, the specifics no longer mattered. The trust between us was gone, and I couldn't imagine restoring it. Through my anger, I told her plainly that if she needed another man to lean on, our marriage was over. I expected tears, apologies, some sign of regret. Instead, she simply nodded and said perhaps it was for the best. She confessed she'd been unhappy for years and had stayed only because of the children. That was Friday night. By Sunday afternoon, she was gone. I had stepped out for a quick trip to the hardware store. When I returned, Emma and Gerald were sitting on the front porch looking bewildered. Emma told me their mother had packed several suitcases, loaded them into a taxi, hugged them both, and said she needed time to figure things out. The house felt hollow without her. The kids kept asking when she'd come back, but I had no answers. That evening I called her. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice casual, almost indifferent. She told me I was free to live my life however I wished, and that she wouldn't get in my way. When I brought up the children, she told me outright that they would be better off in a stable home, something she believed I could give them far more than she could. The entire conversation wrapped up in less than 5 minutes. She hung up, and with that, our last truly substantial exchange for more than 20 years came to an abrupt end. The very next week, I contacted an attorney. My sister Pam worked as a paralegal in a family law office downtown, and she walked me through the steps I could expect in the divorce process. She also introduced me to her boss, a veteran family lawyer who agreed to take on my case. I learned quickly that ending the marriage would be far more complicated than I had imagined. The first hurdle was simply locating Patricia so she could be served with the divorce papers, a task that dragged on for weeks. Acting on my lawyer's advice, I hired a private investigator who eventually discovered that Patricia was living with Sam in an apartment on the other side of town. When the paperwork finally reached her, Patricia refused to sign it. At the same time, she made no move to contest the divorce, didn't show up in court, and never hired legal representation. Instead, she chose to ignore the proceedings entirely, which turned the process into a months-long bureaucratic mess. My attorney explained that if she continued to avoid participating, we could request a default judgment. That approach meant the court could finalize both the divorce and custody arrangements without her involvement, but only if we followed specific procedures and waited out the legally required timeframes. All told, it took nearly 8 months to close the case. During that period, I was a single father in every practical sense, though legally still married. Emma and Gerald adapted with a resilience children sometimes have, but the strain still showed. Emma, being older, understood more. She asked me directly why her mother had left and if she would ever come back. I tried to be honest without shattering her image of her mom, telling her that sometimes adults make decisions that cause hurt and that her mother was facing struggles she didn't know how to handle. Gerald's response was different. He became quieter, plagued by nightmares, and more than once I found him crying in the night, asking if I was going to leave him too. Those moments hit me harder than I thought possible. Managing a full-time job while raising 2 children alone meant my entire life had to be rearranged. I reduced my work hours as much as I could without jeopardizing my employment, accepting a steep cut in pay. My boss, understanding my situation, allowed me to adjust my schedule so I could drop the kids off at school and be home earlier in the evenings. Pam became an essential part of our daily routine, picking the kids up from school 3 days a week and watching them until I returned from work. My mother, who lived 2 hours away, made the trip every other weekend to help with chores and give me a much-needed break from the constant demands of parenting. The financial strain hit immediately. Patricia's part-time income from her insurance office job had helped support our household, and losing that, along with the cost of legal fees, put me under serious pressure. I refinanced the house to cover my attorney's fees and give myself enough breathing room for daily expenses. But the emotional weight was even heavier than the financial one. I had to step fully into roles I had never handled alone before, being present for my children in ways I had previously taken for granted. Every responsibility Patricia had once shouldered was now mine. Emma began to struggle at school. Her grades slipped, and her teachers noticed she seemed distracted and withdrawn. I arranged counseling for her through the school, which also helped Gerald work through his own grief. His pain, however, came out in rebellion, testing limits, breaking small household rules, and pushing boundaries. I came to realize he was checking to see if I would give up on him the way his mother had. It took months of steady, predictable care before he began to feel truly secure again. Almost a year after Patricia left, the court finalized the divorce by default, awarding me full custody of Emma and Gerald, with visitation rights for Patricia if she ever decided to maintain consistent contact. She never did. In the years that followed, we built our own version of normal. The children adjusted to life with just me, though their mother's absence left lasting marks on their trust and relationships. Emma eventually found her footing, excelling in her studies. She graduated as valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to study engineering at the State University. Gerald's journey was different. He often clashed with authority during his teenage years, but his love for sports gave him a sense of purpose. He earned a partial scholarship to play baseball at a smaller college and later graduated with a degree in sports management. It was around the time Emma left for college that I met Lynn, a teacher at Gerald's high school who had helped him through a difficult period in his junior year. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than the impulsive passion of my first marriage. Lynn respected that my children came first. She never tried to replace their mother or push for closeness before they were ready. Emma and Gerald accepted her presence without feeling threatened, and over time, she became an integral part of our family. By the time Gerald graduated from college, both children had built independent, successful lives. Emma was working as a civil engineer in the state capitol, and Gerald had taken a job as an assistant coach for a minor league baseball team. They both stayed in regular contact, visiting often, but their focus was on their own futures. I believed my connection to Patricia was long over. More than 20 years had passed without a single word from her. The kids had grown, built their own lives, and done their best to come to terms with her absence. Then, one Tuesday evening, she appeared at my front door. I didn't recognize her immediately. When she spoke my name, her voice carried the same familiar cadence I remembered, though now it was softer, more hesitant. She asked if she could come in and talk. My first impulse was to refuse, to close the door and end the moment. But curiosity, and perhaps the remnants of the bond we once shared, prompted me to step aside and let her in. Her eyes moved slowly over the living room, taking in the changes that had accumulated over the decades. Her eyes rested on the framed images, Emma beaming beneath her graduation cap, Gerald standing proudly with his new wife, snapshots from milestones she had never witnessed. Moving with care, Patricia eased herself into a chair and revealed she was living with stage 4 breast cancer. The prognosis was dire. Her doctors had given her less than a year. She was receiving treatment, but the chances of recovery were slim. Then she began telling me the story of her life after she had walked away from us. Her time with Sam, she explained, began to deteriorate almost immediately after they started sharing a home full-time. During the stolen hours they'd spent together while I was at work, she had never realized he was a heavy drinker. Once it became clear, the alcohol fed verbal abuse, which soon turned into physical violence and ultimately full control over her finances. She made several attempts to get away, but without money or a safe place to turn, escape was impossible. Leaving me and the children had severed her ties to her family, and no friends were willing to stand by her decision to abandon her responsibilities. Over the years, the mistreatment intensified until she was essentially imprisoned in Sam's apartment. He tracked her every move, decided how much money she could access, and threatened to harm her if she tried to reach out to me or the children. She said we were always on her mind, but she convinced herself we were better off without her. 3 years earlier, Sam had died of liver failure. Since then, she'd been living alone, working low-paying jobs, and slowly trying to reclaim some independence. 18 months ago, she received her cancer diagnosis. The cost of treatment wiped out what little savings she had managed to gather. She told me she wasn't seeking forgiveness or trying to justify her choices. She knew they were beyond justification, and she had given up any right to be part of our family. What she wanted was to make peace before she died and to see Emma and Gerald one final time. I listened without saying a word. When she finished, I told her that forgiveness was not mine to grant. If she wanted to address the past, she would need to speak directly to Emma and Gerald. She asked if I would arrange those conversations, but I explained they were adults now and should decide for themselves. I gave her their phone numbers, making it clear I would not interfere or try to influence them. In the following weeks, she contacted them both. I heard about the calls from Emma and Gerald, each of whom wanted to know my thoughts on their mother's reappearance. Emma's answer was immediate and final. She told Patricia she had needed a mother during her teenage years, through the trials of college, and in the early stages of her career. But Patricia's absence during those times could not be undone by a late-in-life apology. She had no interest in building a relationship now. Gerald spoke with her longer, but his conclusion was the same. He told her how her absence had contributed to behavioral issues, trust problems that undermined his relationships throughout his 20s, and years of therapy to deal with the abandonment. While he respected her search for peace, he couldn't give her the absolution she wanted. Both asked if I agreed with their choices, and I told them I supported whatever felt right to them. Patricia had been absent when they most needed her, and they had every right to protect their own emotional health over her desire for closure. Later, Patricia called me one final time. She thanked me for giving her their contact information and said she understood their decision. She expressed gratitude that I had raised them to be independent, strong, and capable of making difficult choices, and thanked me for never poisoning them against her. She admitted she had expected them to hate her, and was surprised to find their rejection rooted in principle, not bitterness. I told her I had forgiven her years earlier, not because her actions were defensible, but because holding on to resentment would have hindered my ability to be a good father. Forgiveness, I explained, was a choice I made for my own peace, not something I was offering to her. That was 6 months ago. Through Pam, who kept occasional contact with shared acquaintances, I learned Patricia had passed away last month. She died in hospice care, alone. Despite everything, that fact saddened me. I called Emma and Gerald to tell them. Neither regretted their decision not to reconnect, though both admitted they felt relief that her suffering had ended. We did not attend her funeral, which the hospice staff had arranged quietly. Looking back, I have no regrets about the way I handled her return. My responsibility was to protect and support Emma and Gerald, and I believe I upheld that, even when it was difficult. Raising them on my own was exhausting, but it taught me patience, endurance, and what unconditional love truly means. Lessons I might never have learned otherwise. Those years drew us together in a way that has kept us close ever since. Sometimes I wonder whether things might have unfolded differently if I had reacted another way when I discovered Patricia's affair, or if I had been more present early in our marriage. but such questions have no clear answers, and dwelling on them serves no purpose. What I know for certain is that the experience reinforced the need to be present for those who matter, to forgive for one's own peace rather than to benefit the other person, and to honor my children's right to make their own decisions, even when those choices are hard to watch. Emma and Gerald have gone on to build stable, fulfilling lives and healthy relationships despite the damage left by abandonment. They understand the weight of commitment, the importance of responsibility, and the value of showing up for those who rely on you. In some ways, their mother's absence gave them a strength and resilience her presence might not have. I am thankful for the life we managed to create in spite of its rough beginning. In the end, I learned that family is defined not by bloodlines or legal documents, but by presence and dedication, and that love is proven through steady reliability, not dramatic gestures or desperate appeals. Most of all, I came to understand that forgiveness is not a single event but a continual choice, and that it's possible to forgive while keeping the boundaries that protect one's own well-being. I released the bitterness I'd carried toward Patricia, not to grant her peace, but to protect my own state of mind, and to show my children that pain could be met with grace rather than festering resentment. Yet that choice didn't require me to welcome her back into our lives, nor to sway Emma and Gerald toward doing so. They arrived at their own conclusions about their mother, shaped by their memories and emotional needs, and I respected those decisions completely. For me, valuing their autonomy was far more important than chasing an idealized notion of family unity. In the end, the trials we faced bound us together in ways nothing else could, leaving us with a strength that has endured through the years. And with that, our journey comes to a close. I truly welcome your reflections. Please share them in the comments. Thank you for being here, and if this story touched you, I encourage you to discover the other stories on this channel. Until we meet again, my dear friend.